the hammock, a crate of beer close to his hand in the shade, his sweat-stained hat shielding his eyes from the sun's glare that occasionally speared through the palm fronds. The heat was debilitating, and he'd been too lazy to talk, even to Jumbo, who'd taken to sprawling his great length in a nearby planter's chair beneath a vast umbrella to read a copious number of books he'd found in the hospital library. Jumbo's red hair and fair skin were perfectly suited to the northern climate of the Isle of Skye, but the tropics had done him no favours, and although he burnt and peeled, he never went brown, unlike Jim, whose olive skin was now as dark as polished mahogany, which made his eyes an even deeper blue. Jim had slept and dreamed of Peggy and home, of his daughters, Anne, Sissy, and little Daisy, and his sons, Bob and Charlie, of his elder brother Frank and his father Ron, and the town of Cliffehaven, where he'd lived all his life, until 2 wars had forced him to take up arms and leave those familiar and much-loved surroundings. Those dreams echoed the sadness that had plagued him ever since he'd left Beachview. For he'd been gone for almost 4 years, and had yet to meet Anne's little girls, and the last time he'd seen Daisy she'd still been a babe in arms. Sissy, who'd always been the naughty one, with ambitions to become a star of stage and screen, had clearly matured during her time as a waff for RAF Cliff, and was now a business partner in a very successful private taxi hire company in London. As for his sons, they'd left home as evacuees back in 1940, bewildered little boys who couldn't possibly have understood why they'd had to be torn from their family to go and live in Somerset with their big sister Anne. Bob was now a capable young man of 18 and managing the Somerset farm, and Charlie was 15, all set to take his school certificate and go on to technical college to study engineering. Jim had missed so much of them growing up, and there had always been a constant shadow of worry hanging over him that his children and his beloved Peggy had become strangers during his long absence, and he to them, for the war had changed him irreparably. If only the army would release him, he could return home and begin to repair his relationship with them all, and once again be in the bosom of his family. As the exhaustion of almost constant battle had slowly left him, and the long, languid days had begun to make him feel restless and impatient for news of his demob and passage home, he'd abandoned the hammock and set about keeping busy by joining in the fun. The hot, sunny days had become filled with shopping in the Burmese markets, which had sprung up again, or with swimming and playing games of football and cricket on the sand, accompanied by the mouth-watering aromas of barbecued meat cooking on hot coals outside the mess hall. The sultry, tropical nights had seen Jumbo leave his chair, book and umbrella to join Jim and take part in dancing with the off-duty nurses from the nearby hospital, or drinking beer while watching a film or listening to ITMA on the wireless. There had been trips along the coast in a convoy of trucks, delightfully crammed in between laughing nurses who wore little more than swimsuits and native sarongs. These outings always involved more beer, swimming and picnics on the beach, and they'd return to camp satiated with sun and sand and sea, to fall dreamlessly asleep until birdsong and the chatter of monkeys woke them at dawn. It was a leisurely, very pleasant life, and if he'd had Peggy with him, Jim could have stayed on this island forever. But of course all good things must come to an end, and when it was time to leave for England, he knew he'd be amongst the first aboard the ship. Jumbo had gone off just after dawn that morning to the hospital to get more lotion to slather onto his raw skin, or at least that was the excuse he'd given Jim. However, Jim had noticed how he couldn't quite meet his eye, and had seen the way he looked at the pretty little Welsh nurse with the long black hair and lilting voice, and suspected the enormous Scotsman was smitten. If so, then it would be interesting to see what came of this seemingly mutual attraction, for Jumbo had always sworn he'd never tie himself down, and was content to live alone in the glens of his Scottish island home, where he tended the deer and managed the forest of the laird's estate. Jim had been about to leave the hut he shared with Jumbo and 2 other officers to wander down the beach for an early morning swim before breakfast, when the